BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. The first case of avian flu in a sheep has been confirmed. What are the implications?
This is our surveillance working. That actually is quite comforting that we have a programme in place and it's doing what we asked it to do. The risk to general public remains as low.
We'll hear more from the chief vet a little later. First this morning, a project involving farmers and nature conservationists is celebrating the restoration of 400 lost farmland ponds in Essex. A century ago, there were more than 17,000 in the county. Our reporter Howard Shannon has been to Great Priory Farm to meet Emma Gray from the North Essex Farm Cluster as she was dipping her net in a pond which was restored just 2 years ago.
I'm just scooping the net in the shallow marginal areas, which is where most of the biodiversity in ponds thrives.
So, Emma, are all ponds equal? Are they all the same?
When it comes to farmland ponds, there's a couple of different types of pond that we find. So we have the clean water ponds. So they're ponds that are created or restored that are fed by sort of a natural source, a spring, or just clean groundwater. But also on farms, we would have ponds that are fed by the land drain, so from the drainage system. And the idea with those ponds is to have an attenuation effect.
Now, you head up a farmers group, don't you, who are wanting to restore ponds. Tell me about that.
So we're part of the North Essex Farm Cluster, and that's a group of 70 farms in and around the Pant and Blackwater River catchment. And we are all food producing farm businesses, but we're also working together for better outcomes for water, soil and wildlife locally.
Well, joining Emma and I is Darren Tansley from the Essex Wildlife Trust. Darren, is Emma's farm typical in having ponds that were lost and are now being restored? I mean, for instance, how do farmers know if they even used to have a pond?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these ponds have just disappeared completely under the landscape. You might see a slightly damper patch in your crop somewhere or along the field margin, but largely they're gone. And there are some derelict ponds which are completely dry. And the reason we realised what the situation was we mapped them all, about 17,500 ponds from the late 1800s, and discovered that over 10,000 of those were just completely missing from the landscape. And of the other 7,000, there was only about 3,000 that were holding water. So it's a big loss over 100 years.
And this is volunteers who are going out onto farmland to try and uncover these lost ponds?
Yeah, we've got a large group of citizen scientists who do the mapping online, and then they're trained up to go out and give a free survey to a farmer. So they'll go around all of the historic ponds on the farm and then give advice on which ones need restoring, which ones have disappeared, and where they can find funding.
Well, joining us from FWAG is Gilly McNaughton. Gilly, is what Emma's done here typical of the east of England and farmers wanting to restore their ponds?
I'd say we're seeing a huge appetite from farmers to put these habitats back. Ponds can be quite personal spaces. A lot of the farmers that we work with, spent their childhoods playing in ponds, so they're more than familiar with the sort of species and biodiversity they support. And they really want to do something of lasting value. If you want to bring biodiversity back onto a farm, starting with the ponds is just a really quick win.
As you can see at this pond here, letting a lot of light into the pond is really crucial, and just encouraging farmers to go far enough on that point, really get the vegetation back on the right side of the pond so that you get that light in. That's sort of half the battle really, and then trying not to be too neat and tidy, because I think as farmers sometimes we want to leave things looking very neat and symmetrical, and actually with pond restoration it's really important to keep to the original outline of the pond and not interfere too much.
Emma Gray ending that report from Howard Shannon. The first case of avian flu in a sheep was confirmed yesterday on a farm in Yorkshire. In a moment, I'll be talking to the chief vet to find out more. Avian flu is, of course, at the forefront of egg producers' minds at the moment, and free-range layers in many parts of the country must now be kept indoors. All week we're taking a closer look at egg production. Today we're in Wales to talk about free-range eggs. In Wales there have been no cases of avian flu so far, but the country is still a prevention zone, so strict biosecurity measures must be taken. Marie-Claire Carey-Jones has been to Newport to meet farmer Victoria Shervington-Jones, who owns Country Fresh Eggs. Victoria started off by recording for us inside the hen shed, where access is restricted because of the risk of bird flu.
So I am currently stood in house number 3, which has 12,000 hens in it. As you can hear, they're all very inquisitive of what I'm up to. They're all very happy, wandering around my feet, having a little peck of their food before they go out to enjoy a bit of the spring sunshine. The birds obviously have got food, water and everything that they require inside the sheds, and they're free to roam inside the shed. All our eggs are free range, so all our birds are allowed out during daylight hours. So as soon as it gets light, the pop holes open and the birds, if they wish, can roam. It's 1,000 birds an acre, so this shed that we're looking at the moment is a 12,000 bird shed, so they've got 12 acres to roam, and they'd like to jump up in the trees and things like that.
Well, Victoria, we're now standing outside one of your chicken sheds, but I can't get too close at the moment because biosecurity is a real issue for you.
It is, yeah, with the bird flu that's around getting ever closer. We restrict anyone coming on farm. Obviously, we've got the wheel washes and the sprays and the foot dips, just all the usual things, but the birds are still out, so there's still a high risk coming from the wild birds. Where we are down here, we're really close to the coast. A lot of wild birds, a lot of swans on the Gwent levels. Quite a lot of pigeons around at the moment.
And we can hear some birds tweeting around us. How are you feeling about all of this?
If we did get it here, it would probably be the end of our business. It is a worry all the time.
And yet you're still continuing to run the business, the free-range egg business. And demand now from consumers seems to be more for free-range eggs.
So we are in 2025 now, and a lot of the supermarkets did say that they would go solely 100% free-range in 2025. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen. But the demand is there. The place where it might fall out a little bit is when people are eating in restaurants and buying cakes and things like that with ingredients in. Where are those eggs coming from? We've lost quite a lot of birds in the UK to bird flu this winter. You know, the supply of egg has dropped and the demand is still there.
Inside the farmhouse, I meet David Jarrett, Policy Advisor for NFU Cymru.
Things on the egg side are quite good at the moment, price-wise. But the worry is, of course, avian influenza.
And what impact is that having on free-range eggs in particular?
You're talking about 90% of Wales production now is free-range. And obviously, free-range means hens go out and potentially, because they're out, any contact with wild birds certainly does increase the risk of contracting the disease. So potentially, if the birds were housed, you would be increasing your biosecurity to a higher level.
But how does that housing impact on the free-range status?
Now it's agreed, if Welsh Government putting a housing order, then those eggs could be still labelled free-range whilst the housing order remains in place.
Is there a worry, though, that people then might lose faith in the free-range stamp because of this?
I remember it's only housing during the disease period, because I think the priority for everybody is bird welfare. So, you are protecting the bird welfare by putting them in the house. It's not by choice, it's of necessity.
David Jarrett, Policy Advisor for NFU Cymru. Bird flu has been found in a domestic sheep in the UK for the first time. The case in Yorkshire was confirmed yesterday. DEFRA say the sheep was on a farm where avian flu was present in captive birds, and that this suggests an obvious route of transmission from wild birds to captive birds to the sheep. The rest of the small flock of sheep were tested, but they were all negative. Surveillance of mammals for avian flu has been stepped up. That's partly because in the United States, many dairy cattle and even some dairy workers have also gone down with the disease. Christine Middlemiss is the UK's chief vet. She told me what they'd found.
We have been risk assessing where we find mammals, cows and sheep, primarily, because we always sample pigs. on confirmed poultry bird flu farms. And on this occasion, we risk assessed and we decided to sample the sheep. And of the 10 sheep sampled, one of them had a positive result for antibodies. So we resampled the sheep and she had lambed. So we took milk and again another blood sample for antibodies. The milk was positive and she still had some antibodies. So we opted to cull her for extensive testing. We sampled 19 other sheep, very small backyard premises, and they are all negative, and her lambs are negative.
Would there be clinical signs of avian flu in sheep and other livestock?
Given this is the first finding of it, and we found it because we went looking on our surveillance, then probably not. And this was, say, very localised infection, but it was an infection there. And it mirrors in the US dairy cattle, they have found mastitis sometimes just in one quarter, right? Not in the whole udder. Sometimes the cows have been sick, and I think a few cows have died. They've had a more systemic infection. The important thing is that risk assessment. Is there potential contact between known infected birds and mammals? Biosecurity, that cleanliness is so important. And then if you're treating a mastitis and it's not making progress, do submit samples. So where a treatment for a fairly well-known disease is not working, then we will test it for other potential causes.
So you are testing all livestock now around avian flu outbreaks, is that right?
No, it's very specifically on farms where we have confirmed avian influenza, because those are the ones most likely to have an increased risk. We will always continue to risk assess, so if we felt there was more risk to other neighbouring farms from this individual sheep, then we would go and sample them. In this case, we don't.
What about wild mammals? I know there's been a case in grey seals on the North Norfolk coast, but what about other, like deer, for instance?
So we found it in wild mammals that are known to prey on dead wild birds. So we've had the seals, we had a case of, I think it was raccoon dogs, quite a number of months ago now in a wildlife park where they were fed dead shot pheasant. So we have seen it, and that's not just us, we've seen that in other countries, that where there's been a direct link to infected birds, mammals can become infected. I guess this is the first time it's been found in a sheep, and of course sheep aren't eating other animals. It has come through indirect contact with the level of contamination.
What is your advice to sheep farmers then?
We don't think there's increased risk if there's not a clear pathway. So I wouldn't be worrying about necessarily being near a poultry farm, but don't leave open sheep feed if you can avoid it, where wild birds can come along and they have bird droppings in the feed and then the sheep eats them. These sorts of things are important to be aware of.
How worried are you that there has been a case in sheep, full stop?
Well, this is our surveillance working. You know, we have a risk-based programme and it said, well, there is risk and we found one sheep and the other sheep are negative. So that actually is quite comforting that we have a programme in place and it's doing what we asked it to do. And they say the risk to general public remains as low. And additionally, Food Standards Agency say the risk to the general public is very low.
UK Chief Vet Christine Middlemiss. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Rebecca Rooney. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.